All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mike in New Haven podcast. It is episode 90. We are 90 episodes into this show that started all the way back in 2017. Stands for a 2-year hiatus to finish college, as I mentioned last episode. This show has been rolling strong now as we reach another milestone episode. We're 10 away from the century mark, so we're getting close to the 100th episode of this show. If you haven't checked out the previous 2 episodes, they air Tuesday and Wednesday. In the evening. This interview is being recorded on a Tuesday, so you'll be seeing this interview on a Thursday, but the previous 2 episodes featured retired NYPD officer and current defense attorney Joe Murray, who talked about his career from cop to Esquire, and of course his pending civil litigation against Conor McGregor for the infamous UFC bus assault in Brooklyn at the Barclays Center in 2019. This interview is really cool for me because we're going to get back into the sports aspect of this podcast, and this is somebody I grew up watching and reading. Even though I live in New Haven, the benefit is being sandwiched between New York City and Boston. You get the Boston papers, you get the New York papers. So I grew up reading the Post, the Daily News, the Globe, and I grew up watching my next guest every Sunday on ESPN Sports Reporters. And who is my next guest? Well, he's a man who's been involved in the sports world for over 50 years, a 1996 recipient of the Basketball Hall of Fame's Kurt Gowdy Award, 2000 recipient of the Associated Press's National Sports Writer of the Year, and 4-time winner of Sports Writer of the Year Award from the National Sports Writer and Sportcasters Association. He served as a columnist for the Boston Globe for 43 years, from 1969 until 2012. A television personality as well. As I mentioned, he appeared frequently on ESPN, still does, but most notably as a panelist for ESPN's iconic show that aired every Sunday morning from 1988 until 2017, The Sports Reporters, which continues as a podcast, which we'll talk about later. Bob Ryan joins me now on the Mike in New Haven podcast. Bob, so happy to have you. Welcome. How are you?
Hi, Mike. Good. Fun to be here.
Good to have you here. So we'll get right into it. So this first question is always an easy one. You were born in Trenton, New Jersey, but your childhood was primarily spent in Massachusetts. Take me through what your early years were like.
No childhood in Massachusetts. I said Massachusetts once before. Well,
we're off to a great start then.
Look at colleges. We made a little trip once to Cape Cod, but so I was unfamiliar with living in Massachusetts. No, I grew up in Trenton and lived there full time until the summer of 1966, in between my junior and senior year at Boston College, when I stayed in Boston and worked and spent the whole summer there, and 67, excuse me, and between my junior and senior year. So anyway, I grew up in Trenton. That's my roots. That's how I got involved in sports, music, entertainment, the whole bit. It was a very, very interesting place to grow up. In retrospect, you don't know it when you're living through it. You have no idea that you're different. We were different. And the reason we were different was that Trenton, New Jersey in the 50s and 60s was without question the television capital of America. No one knew this because, as you mentioned, you were sandwiched between New York and Boston. I was sandwiched between Philadelphia and New York. Trenton is 35 to 40 miles north of the William Penn statue in Philadelphia and 60 miles southwest of New York. And so we got all the channels on the dial. Now, in the 50s and 60s, people in America, not almost 100%, got what was in their local market, period. 3 channels, the NBC, the ABC, and the CBS channel. That was it. And anybody who is in their 50s, 60s, 70s will tell you that. But in Trenton, we got everything on the Philadelphia dial, which was 3, 6, and 10, as well as 12 from Wilmington, Delaware. And we got everything on the New York dial, which was 2, 5, 7, 9, 11, and then later on 13, the public station. So why is this important? Well, in terms of a sports fan, I grew up, we had the Yankees and the Giants were on channel 11, and the Dodgers were on channel 9, and the Phillies were on channel 6. So I had access to all these games going up when most people in America did not have that proliferation of major league games available to them on television. Secondly, Trenton was a great sports town. Very, very big into high school sports, very big into Babe Ruth League, where they won the World Series twice in 56 and 62. Morrisville, Pennsylvania, across the river, won the Little League World Series in 55. And it was a big high school oriented town with great sports coverage. 2 functioning daily papers. And Mike, here's the thing, and I'll get off the soapbox now. Trenton, New Jersey is without question today the smallest market in America that has 2 competitive cutthroat daily newspapers still going. The Trenton Times in the afternoon and well, now they're switched to the morning, and the Trentonian. No other market in America remotely that small can make that statement. So that's the town I grew up in. It was very formative and very important for me.
Let me just say that they're, look at me starting off this podcast, getting the first detail wrong. That, folks, is why they do not pay me the big bucks. So I said he grew up in Massachusetts, so my apologies there. I clearly missed a little step in my homework, so you can dock me 5 points for that one. So tell me, when did you first take an interest in writing?
I know this. I like the printed word. I was interested. I was a good reader. And this is a combination it's a two-part word, sports writing. Sports part, the easy part. Mm-hmm. I mean, a million people standing around at the bar can talk on some, reasonably coherent sports. We know that, okay? And do every day. Somebody's doing that right now. Yeah. Talk radio has become the biggest format in radio in America, taken over from country. I don't know if you know that. And people don't know. The more stations that program sports talk than any other format in America right now. Okay. But writing, oh yeah, good luck. Tell how many people could go write a coherent game story in 45 minutes. The answer is not many. So, all right, now, I just happen to be a reasonably precocious kid with regard to reading as well as sports. My father was involved in sports. We can talk about that. That was the easy part. He would take me, for example, to a high school basketball game on a Friday night. And then I couldn't wait to get up Saturday morning to read the paper, to read the game account, to see how it was presented and what I saw, if it confirmed my judgment, or what did I learn that I didn't know about the game, about the people. So it was part of the deal for me always. And I read the paper, and also when I was 9 years old, I was given a subscription to Sporting News and Sport Magazine. You had to have Sport Magazine in the 50s. It was indispensable. Nothing comparable today. I mean, there's sports magazines, but they're not comparable to what it meant to so many people. And so you had your monthly sport magazine, and I hear your weekly Sporting News. I was reading them when I was 9 years old, and I just happened to be, I like the printed word. Now, to answer your question, the first thing I wrote was for myself, and I was 11 years old, and I sat down and wrote a column called The Sportster, I called it, and it was dealing with the grade school basketball league that I played in, and general observations about big time sports. And I was 11 years old. That's the first time I ever wrote anything for an audience of one.
And it's not even, you mentioned sports radio again. Growing up sandwiched between New York and Boston, WEEI, okay. WFAN. That's what I grew up on. I grew up on Mike and the Mad Dog. I grew up on Dennis and Callahan. I grew up on all those shows. Mm-hmm. And so it's the writing part is interesting because it was you. I say it's you and Mike Lupica that particularly inspired me to want to start writing about sports because, again, you mentioned talking about it, and we're talking about Bob Ryan here in the Mike Newman podcast. That's one thing. I could do that. I did that in college or during all my years in college, and it was a lot of fun. But to actually sit down and properly format one's opinion, that's the hard part. And I don't know how one gets good at it, really. Of course, your colleague, Mitch Albom, same thing, to properly chronicle. And not only that, this is another thing I guess you can kind of talk about here. We watched it happen, especially now when there's so much available. We could easily just tap it on our phone and tune into a game. There might be the mentality amongst some, okay, thank you for writing it, genius. I saw it already. So to actually keep the recap captivating, while also, inculcating your own opinions and observations into it that maybe the reader did not have on their own, I really do marvel how a sports writer, or any writer for that matter, is able to do that.
Well, it's an aptitude. I have, that whole left side, right side brain thing, which I never get straight, which is which. I am totally and completely 98.5% on that creative. I think it's left side, and no aptitude mechanically. No interest in putting things together. Taking apart. I don't care how the car works. I take it to the mechanic. If I turn on the key and the engine starts, that's what I care about. I don't care how it works. I don't care how things work. People have a curious brain about things like that. I don't. I just tell me that it does work and give it to me, and when it doesn't work, go fix it. That's it. But wording, I love playing with words. I like rearranging words. I like the rhythm and just the rhythm of words. And writing is about, for me, two things ultimately. Assuming you've got the vocabulary to start with, and you have a knowledge basis of what you're writing about. It's about two things. It's about confidence and rhythm. And you don't always have the same level of confidence. I guess it's that whole biorhythm thing, which you don't hear about much anymore. But I think there's something to that. Some days you feel like much more sharper and much sharper than others, and there's no explanation for it. And rhythm and understanding how transitions work and making transitions and that it's an aptitude. I mean, I just was gifted with it, and thank God, because I don't have too many other. Seriously, I don't have too many other skills that society would value. Frankly, I don't. I can talk and I can write, and that's about it. And fortunately, there's hours away for me to make a living. Because if it weren't, I really do not know what I would have done.
I think it was Henry Rollins, the great frontman for Black Flag and the Rollins Band, and also a great spoken word artist, that once said, and I'm paraphrasing here, would you rather have a bucket load of talent and little motivation, or a little bit of talent and a bucket load of motivation? And that's really true with a lot of people. You know, if as long as you have the motivation, which clearly you've had to get to this point in your career, I think that can take you far, even if maybe the talent level may not match up to other people. You know, who cares? Because maybe those people kind of, for example, listening to the sports reporters, you always talk about Shaquille O'Neal, right? Shaquille O'Neal, you've always said you felt he could have accomplished more.
Yes.
He had the talent. He was naturally gifted, still had a heck of a career.
Yes.
But, you know, there's the argument that had he kept himself in consistent physical shape, he could have done more. Where look at somebody, I'm trying to think of a good example. And this is not the best example, but maybe somebody like Rick Fox, right? Rick Fox was a good player. He was a decent player, not on the talent level of Shaq, but he made himself a serviceable player that enjoyed a 13-year career. So there's the comparison there, you know?
Well, yeah, Shaq was interesting because where it manifested itself was rebounding for me. And to me, it's a disgrace that he never led the league in rebounding, which I think he should have done a half a dozen times minimum, given his incredible physical gifts, the size, the agility, strength. But what rebounding's about, I firmly believe this, the pecking order of things that matter in rebounding. One, do you want the damn ball or don't you? You've got to want the ball, all right? You got to go get the ball, you got to want the ball. Number two is positioning. Number three is timing. And four, and least important, is jumping. And some of the great rebounders that I knew such as Paul Silas and Wes Unseld, senior, by the way, since junior is now in the news, as you know. Wes, they've got many a rebound at or below the rim, not above, because of their mastery of all the other determinations. Moses Malone was the greatest example of the want to and getting it done. In addition to the anticipation, his offensive rebounding sense of knowing where a shot was launched, where it's likely to go off. He had made a science of it. Shaq didn't bother. Shaq took the rebounds that came to him with his 7'1", 200 and 300, whatever. He took the rebounds that came to him more often than not. He didn't get rebounds that, quote, didn't belong to him, which great rebounders do. And Dennis Rodman, inch for inch, as good a rebounder as anybody, including my hero, one of my great heroes, Bill Russell. But I got to give Rodman credit at 6'7". He mastered, he was a complete, a perfect exhibit A of my assessment of what we. So anyway, and you've never fun about Rick Fox. Rick Fox was here, and by the way, one of the 2 or 3 people in my experience that I'll never forget personally, because he wrote me a thank you note for something I wrote about him, and that's only happened about 2 or 3 times ever. And when I hated seeing Rick Pitino made a huge mistake. He came in and cleaned house, and he just swept Rick Fox out to sea like he was a nobody. And Rick Fox, when he was here, never gave up a cheap basket, never quit on a play, was a team guy to the max, as the Lakers found out, and playing with a bunch of more gifted players, fitting into doing what he did well. He got himself some rings and deserves them. And anyway, so that's a very good example that you chose.
Okay, well, that actually works out. You talk about rebounding. Before I get back to your career, that I'm a Knicks fan. Why do you think we were so frustrated with Porzingis? The guy's 7'3", and he can't get a rebound. He averages only about 7. So you were a graduate of Boston College, and that, of course, is where you met Mr. Lupica. So you learn a lot of pivotal lessons in college about not just whatever it is you're going to school for, of course, but also life. So I will say this: what lessons from your BC days, if any, still guide you to this day?
I have to tell you, it almost didn't matter in terms of I have to say, intellectual, I don't know about social development, where I went. And I enjoyed BC for reasons I'll tell you, and it's a fine school. But my formation was prep school, and that's what gave me the extra boost. That gave me it gave me a chance to develop my aptitude that I mentioned, and give me a chance to explore and do things that I was good at Lawrenceville School in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. That was the big deal. BC was fine, but I'll be honest. I coasted through BC. I coasted. I had no desire to graduate first or second or third, or I just wanted to get, society dictates that you get that sheepskin, right? Mm-hmm. I think higher education is a racket. I've said that for 50 years. I think it's a racket, and society dictates you do it. But the fact is, the way it has evolved, and the criteria that determines who gets into what school and what they do, and does it really matter in the end where you went? If you get, for a lot of people, no. But BC's where I met a woman my second year there who's now been married to for 52 years, which means we've been together for 57 years. And secondly, I say I majored in basketball and I minored in snack bar sitting. Bob Cousy was the basketball coach at BC, and practices were open. And as a basketball lover, and having been a prep school player, I got cut from the freshman team. That was the end of my official career. I absorbed everything I could learn from watching and listening and to him coach, that team and watch him play. I became the play-by-play basketball guy on the student radio station my freshman year, which was a fantastic thrill, and did that for 4 years. Worked for the school paper. And I'll be honest, I coasted. I did my due diligence to get the degree. I can't tell you where I graduated. I can't tell you what kind of grades I had. All I know is I didn't flunk. I got out. And I was ready to get, and BC, and socially, I loved it. Made good friends, had a great time. We won 117 games in 4 years, not bad. And we went to 4 tournaments, and that's what I remember. And had a girlfriend all the time.
I can't complain about that. And listen, it's funny you mentioned the higher education. Look at my city. I mean, I got Yale's 5 minutes from me. I live about 5-10 minutes from downtown. I didn't go to Yale. I went to community college, which was right in downtown. And I could say, it's funny. One of my professors mentioned she was an adjunct. She taught there. She also taught at Fordham in the Bronx, which has produced many great broadcasters, particularly Vince Scully coming from there. But she said the same curriculum I teach those kids down in Fordham when I take the train into the city, I'm teaching you guys. So it really doesn't, it's funny. It really does.
Well, it's a racket, and it is. But society is very demanding that you have this proof of authenticity, which is the degree. So you got to get it, okay?
You got to get it.
Unless you can go in and fix a sink, and that's the thing. The degradation of manual labor in this country is one of the most awful developments of the last 50 years. Is the idea that people are not valuing manual labor the way it once was and the way it should be. Labor unions, demise, all that. We can go way off the rails here, But if you want, I don't want to, either. But I'm just throwing it out there. But as I said, fortunately, my skills found a home, and I was very fortunate. And I was very fortunate, Mike, in not only to have any kind of a job, but to get a job where I got it and when I got it, for the sports that I love, with baseball, particularly in basketball. But basketball, as it's changed so much, and they've all changed, frankly, But anyway, I was very lucky to be in Boston. But just to show you how capricious it all is, I applied to 5 schools. Yale, and I applied there because when you go to a school like Lawrenceville and many of your friends are applying, you go along for the ride, even though I would have been a very curious pick at Yale. Williams, which would have been interesting because it would have, but that was not going. And BC Holy Cross and Georgetown, and I didn't get into Yale and Williams. I got into BC Holy Cross and Georgetown, although I got into Georgetown via the back door, shall we say, long story. And I eventually wound up making a mental coin flip: Boston, Washington, and I picked Boston, and it turned out to be a terrific choice. I have no idea what would have happened in my career, in Washington, or if I were covering the Bullets rather than the Celtics. And believe me, that made a big difference in my entire life. Absolutely. So it's interesting how you get to the Celtics beat. Frank Rosa, who himself was a terrific hockey writer, is actually in the Hockey Hall of Fame. There was a vacancy for the Celtics beat, and he hires you. You're in your early 20s at the time. Now, this is during, kind of, I don't want to say the end of the Celtics' glory years, because they still won a few championships in the 1970s, but this is during a transitional period because Russell stops playing. Now he's transitioning into coaching, and you're coming in during this time when there's still so many legendary figures surrounding the franchise. And so I'll ask you, first things first, on Frank Rosa, what was it like having him as your editor? And the second part of the question, which you'll get to later, is did you find yourself in your early years being starstruck by how many legends were in front of you? And when I joined the Boston Globe as a summer intern, there were two separate papers, the Boston Morning and the Evening, separate staffs, entirely separate staffs. He was the morning sports editor. A guy named Ernie Roberts was the evening sports editor. So when any event would come along, the Globe would send people for both papers, you know, and including on the road, you know. So that's the world I inherited. Now they consolidated the staffs after my first year, but when I started, we had totally separate staff. Anyway, I had trying to do the Reader's Digest version of this here. I was a summer intern in '68. I also was concurrently in the Army Reserves, and I was going to have to go on active duty in October of '68 at the conclusion of that summer. And I stayed around. I was asking, can I stay around till I go on active duty in September and October? And I was an office boy during Monday through Friday, and I covered high school football on the weekend for them for $20 a shot. Okay, nice to have. And then I went on active duty, but I only had to go for 4 months total because that was the reserve thing. And then you spend the next 5.5 years going to meetings, which I did. So I come out in February '69 and they rehire me with a verbal promise that you'll get the next opening on the staff. I was brought back as an office boy, frankly, okay, Monday through Friday. We go through the entire summer, nothing's happening. And then in October, Bob Sales, who was the Celtics beat guy and a really good one, and he wanted to be a columnist, and they didn't have an opening. And he got frustrated and a little bit angry. And he said, the hell with this. And he left the sports department to go to news, creating the vacancy. Now you say, why didn't they hire the next guy up? It just so happened they didn't have an heir apparent. They just didn't. They hadn't groomed one. There was nobody that was a huge basketball fan that, you know, except for me. And I think it was basically, well, the kid knows basketball, we'll give him a shot kind of thing. So he comes up to me on a Wednesday, I think it was, in October, and says, good news for you. You're going to be on the staff and you're covering the opening game Friday night. 2 nights later, exhibitions are over. Hadn't seen a game, hadn't met anybody. New coach, Tom Heinsohn, never met him. I'm covering opening night on Friday night. Well, who's the coach of the Cincinnati Royals? Bob Cousy. That was the only comfort I had, was I was able to talk to the Coos after the game. But anyway, that's how I got thrown into it, Mike. And the first month and a half, they alternated between myself and Peter Gammons, who I'd started with at the Globe the same day, June 10th, 1968. And then gradually they gave it to me, and I became the beat guy. And so that was it. And you're right, it was a transition year. It was post-Russell, post-Sam Jones. They went from winning the championship to winning 34 games. And it was a different atmosphere. And you know, but it wasn't negative. It wasn't nasty. There was a sense, well, we're in transition. We're going to have to figure it all out. And Heinsohn was a new coach, and everything was different. But it was all new. Oh, it was new to me, naturally. And Heinsohn was terrific with me and helped me learn the nuances of the NBA. I could write a basketball story, but I didn't know the NBA. I was a college guy. You know, I'd gone to games, many, but I wasn't attuned to the nuances of how the NBA works and how it thinks. And he was very gracious in helping me understand that. And in addition, so were the players, John Havlicek, Don Nelson, Satch Sanders, those veterans. And then I was the same age as the rookies. I was the same age as Don Chaney, JoJo White, Steve Kaburski. Within a year, we're all between 23 and 24. I was 23. It doesn't happen today. You know, it just doesn't. And I was incredibly lucky. And I was able to find my way through this. The next year, they draft Dave Cowens, and they get good again. They don't make the playoffs, but they're good. The third year, they make the playoffs. And on they go. And now, the long story short, in the next 5 years, they win 2 championships and go to the conference finals twice. And they win 68 games in 1973, 74. What a ride that was. My God. And even though they lost in the playoffs. But anyway, that's the bare bones of the story. But to answer back to Rosa, a wonderfully nice man and a kindly guy. And then he went back from being an editor to take over that Bruins beat, as you mentioned, got himself into the Hockey Writers Wing of the Hall of Fame. And really was a wonderful man, a gentleman, really good guy.
Sounded like it. Bob Ryan's our guest here at the Mike David Podcast. This is episode 90. Great to be talking with Bob here. One of my favorite writers as a kid. So it's always nice to finally get these people in an open-ended forum like this. So, you know, I got to say, and it's funny you mentioned that because Larry Brooks, another Hockey Hall of Famer who's been covering the Rangers forever, was on this show a little while ago. And he was talking about that because originally, I mean, we all know him as the Rangers guy, at least I do growing up. but he covered the Islanders dynasty. And what he said was the exact same thing. I was the same age as a Butch Goring, as a John Tonelli, as a Bobby Nystrom, and all those great players. And not only that, now, I mean, let's just say the pandemic wasn't happening, even before the pandemic. You only see these guys or gals in the locker room. You ask them a few questions. What do you think about this, that, the other? And that's it. They go and they run in their own circle, and you run in your circle. You file your column, and that's where it starts. That's where it stops. The interaction is minimal. Back then, you'd be with these guys in bars. You'd be with them on trips. You're with them all the time. You get to know them, not just as players, but as people. How did that help you as a columnist? And did it, did sometimes, whenever you had to write a critical column, did it create any, did it ruffle any feathers, is what I'm getting at?
Number one, I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not exaggerating. I honestly can't wrap my head around or comprehend what it's like to do with this job today. You framed it extremely well. Because my experience was exactly Larry's. Dinner with them, drinking, closing up bars night after night on the road. Travel, you arrive at the airport, checking into the gate together. You rode the bus to shoot around, rode the bus after the game, rode the bus. It was a totally different. You knew their wife, you knew their girlfriends, you knew both of them. You knew the kids. There were a couple of circumstances.
That's fine.
I'm not at liberty to discuss.
That's fine.
They treated you as a human being. You were part of the deal, and they accepted you. Now I always say, and I'm going to divert a little bit here in terms of how this works. When I still am in a position where I'm speaking to groups of prospective journalists, whether they're high school or college, I said, remember this, you're a salesperson. Look at yourself as a salesperson, and you're selling yourself to the players, the coaching staff, the administrators. You're selling yourself by the way you carry yourself, the knowledge you bring, the questions you ask, the way you handle yourself. Well, I never thought about it in those days, but I was just being me. And I was just, I often came with good ice-breaking knowledge about their high school background, or, plus obviously their college background and stuff. And I don't know, I related to them. They now, your big jackpot question, ultimately, you're going to have to write something that is not overly flattering, to say the least, right? And you're going to have to depend on their maturity and understanding of what your job is, and to get through that. And you have to be willing, and you got to show up. Basically, when you write something that's negative, you got to show up. So you got to present yourself, give them a chance to get back at you or take it out. And what I say is, when I preach, and people confuse objectivity and subjectivity or as the issue. No, the issue is not that. Issue is fairness. Are you fair? And along those lines, you have to cultivate a credibility base that not only do you know good from bad, but you know good from great. And you don't overpraise when it's not warranted, and you save it for when it's warranted, and you prove yourself that you understand the difference. And so, you win get their confidence when you reward them, by noticing something that they did well that maybe not everybody would have, but it's, and then, if you have to, the hope, and sometimes it's not going to go over too well. I had my problems covering the Red Sox in '77 in that regard, but I also had some very big moments of approval from players, but that's it. My big problem, Mike, and it wasn't player versus me. It was coach versus me. When Tom Heinsohn began to think I had betrayed him, I think, and that I was reflecting the viewpoint of players in certain matters more than his or instead of his, and he didn't like it. And he took it out, and to the point where I got off the beat. I didn't want to have any more fights with him and after 7 years. But it never got to a point where I had a major problem with a player and with the Celtics.
At least, well,
now they were winning,
Yeah, no, of course.
I always laugh, Mike, when guys tell me they don't care who wins and loses. Damn well it matters who wins and loses, because the more they win, the happier they are, and the happier they are, the better your life's going to be. Trust me on this. All right.
Of course. No, I'm saying, and imagine, it goes to show, like, for example, I'm a Yankee fan. Growing up in Connecticut, you either root for the Boston teams, the New York teams. Yeah. I mean, I'm a New York guy. So
you're west of the divide. I know where the divide's much further east than Connecticut. You're safely west of the divide.
Yeah, that's fair. I am. I'm West, so that is very much true. So growing up as a Yankee fan, okay, you're used to them being good, but imagine covering the beat in the, I don't want to say the 80s because they had a winning record a lot of the time, but there wasn't a wild card back then, so they didn't make it. But the early 90s when they were really bad, like a 67 win team, if you're in the locker room having to cover guys like Danny Tartabull and Kevin Moss, it's not easy, but you accelerate ahead in the 90s when there's Scott Brocious and Bernie and O'Neill and Jeter. It makes your job a lot more fun. I was having that conversation, as a matter of fact, with not to name drop, but Ken Davidoff when he was here a while ago from the New York Post. So I'll get to, I'll get further into your career, particularly going into television with ESPN in a moment. But I want to stay on the sports path for a second because you had a front row seat to one of the greatest eras in sports. 1979, 1980, around that time period. Larry Bird gets into the league. He comes to Boston. Magic Johnson gets into the league. Of course, he goes to the Lakers. They just squared off in the national championship in college, and now they're in the NBA, and thus starts one of the greatest rivalries in sports, individually speaking. And thus starts one of the greatest chapters in what I think is a top 3 rivalry in all of sports. There's Yankees, Red Sox, yes, and that has its proper place. But Celtics, Lakers, especially in the 80s, was appointment television. And you were front and center for that. Take me through covering what was a decade essentially of just flat out war.
I have often said that, professionally speaking, if I could go back to January 1st, 1980 and to January 31st, 1989 and do it all over again, everything, the good, the bad, the indifferent, I'd do it over again in a heartbeat. It was the goal. And I believe if you paraded in here 15 or 20 people, men and women who covered the NBA in the 80s who were around and asked them, what was your favorite time you've ever worked in your business? That the vast majority would say the 80s in the NBA. It was the perfect convergence of the basketball on the court, the people you're involved with, and the access. The access was still perfectly wonderful. And everything worked. Now, the Celtics Lakers, everybody knows, but let me tell you something. Before that, there was another rivalry that Larry Bird has said he liked even more, the 76ers. Yeah. And they had to get by Philly. Bird's rookie year, they won 62 games and got beat by the 76ers in the playoffs in 1980, if you recall. And the reason they got beat was they were too small. Their front line was Dave Cowens in his last hurrah at 6'8", Havlicek 6'5", and Emil Carr. So they weren't big enough. And and Bird, and Bird, Cowens, and Havlicek, and they got beaten on the boards by Caldwell Jones and Darryl Dawkins. By the way, talking about squandered talent, he's the captain of the all squandered talent team. It's a sad story. Good person, wonderful, fun guy. Should have been a Hall of Famer, but that's for another show. But anyway, okay, they beat him in 81, down 3-1, winning the last 3 games by 2-2-1, down 9 points in Game 7 in 1981 with 5 minutes to go. The referees went like this: "Go to it, boys. Just let them play." Celtics came back and won. And in 82, they were down 3-1 again. They win 5 and 6. Everybody thinks they're going to win 7. They lose at home to Philly. Anyway, the rivalry was great. And then Philly made their move. And they, of course, that's after the first year, Celtics traded, they got McHale and Parrish. Okay, I forgot to get that part. Philly makes their move. They get Moses. And the 82-83 Sixers are one of the great one-season teams of all time. Believe me. 65-16 team won the championship. That's the 4-5-4 team, Mm-hmm. And okay, now we get the Lakers and 84 and 85 and 87. And yes, it was wonderful. And then at the tail end of that, we had the Lakers and the Pistons in those 2 finals. And so 88 and 89. Oh, it was wonderful. But the Celtics Lakers thing captivated America. There's no doubt. The Bird Magic thing was a dream for the league, the market. One on one side, a corner, one on the other side of the country. They were big mutually, admirers. They finally got to meet and understand that there was a basis for a true friendship, which there still is to this day. Oh, but traveling, we traveled. It was commercial. Everything was this, as I told you about in the 70s. But here's the other thing: the Lakers were in the finals 8 times in a decade, which means 8 times we got to spend May and or June in LA. out of the East. You think we didn't love that? I mean, it was socially, it was beyond belief. Artistically, it's beyond belief, and it was just it'll never be replicated. For the writer, it'll never be replicated. And the basketball was tremendous. Look at the names we're talking about.
Of course, I often let me just take a sip of water here. I often quote your line in my conversations with friends about referees, especially these days where the refs just literally live by the whistle. Why am I here?
Why am I here? Line. Thank you. I like that.
I often use that line because it's so true. Because, think about it. And you talked about great rivalries. There was the Celtics and the Sixers. Yes, Celtics, Lakers. The Celtics and the Pistons hated each other during that era. And just to tell you what the officiating was like back then, and you'd never see this today. And imagine this today, folks, from all my younger listeners out there. If you go on YouTube, which is a treasure trove for anything that you want to look at, there's literally a fight where Bird gets taken down by Lambier, who was a dirty player. Listen, talented player, but he put the D in dirty, put it that way. He takes down Bird. Bird throws 2 chops while on the ground, punches him twice, and they called that a common foul. The only reason that they got ejected was because Bird chucked the basketball at Bill Lambier afterwards. Otherwise, they would have kept him in the game. You would just be kept in the game back then. Now you get suspended, you get fined up the wazoo, and yeah, you don't want to see people fighting. I get it, but it was a remarkably different time back then.
Parrish also punched out Lambier.
Yeah.
in front of referee Jess Kersey, and there was no call.
No call. He twice. He literally chopped him.
They did hate each other.
They did.
They hated Lambier specifically.
Everybody did.
They hated Lambier specifically. Isaiah was annoying at that point too. He hadn't fully figured it all out the way he did and later did to put it all together the right way. I'll never forget game 1, I believe it was in '87. Ainge is hurt and Jerry Seasting is playing as a starter, and he was definitely a sub type of a specialist, not a starting guy. And it was my belief that Isaiah's goal in that game was simply to humiliate Seasting at the expense. And he did win the game, but winning the game wasn't his number 1 priority. It was the second priority. He was just something about him in those days. He grew up, he got out of that, but there was stuff not to like about him. But it was 99% was about Lambier, but they did hate him. Vinnie Johnson, they didn't hate Vinnie, they admired Vinnie. Because Vinnie got his nickname from Danny Ainge. The microwave nickname came after a game in which he torched them, but the Celtics held on to win in the regular season. And Danny, and this is when, of course, the Bears were the Bears, and Refrigerator Perry was famous. And he said, if they call that guy in Chicago the Refrigerator, they should call this guy the Microwave because he heats up in a hurry. That's a derivation of what I consider my favorite nickname of a basketball player in the last 40 years. Was
and it's stuck.
You're exactly right. There was a tremendous feeling. It was real. And the tension. And of course, Lambier, you know how Lambier came out of he led them out and on the layup line, and he ran up and he stuffed the ball and dunked the ball and then spiked it. And that's how he started out, letting the world know, bleep you, I'm here. We're here. That was his attitude. Now, the funny thing about Lambier, so people don't know, I used to say this, and I still believe it could be true to this day. The only player in the league, certainly in the 80s, whose father made more than he did. His father was an auto exec in Detroit.
Oh, okay. And that, of course, the auto industry was...
Except for sons of players, except for sons of players, that may still be true. There's no player in the league whose father makes more money than he does.
That's probably true because the auto industry was booming back then, particularly in the 1980s.
Still flourishing.
Oh, yeah, of course. So television is an interesting part, getting back into the meat and potatoes of your career, because you did it for a while locally. You didn't like it. And then in 1988, that's when ESPN by now has a little bit of sway. They're still a relatively baby network, but they're starting to make headway. And that's when the concept for the idea of the sports reporters comes about. And of course, you know it for those of you that grew up watching it like I did. You either grew up watching it during the Dick Schaap era, which I've missed. I was too young for. I was born in 2000. Or you grew up watching it, as I was able to, during the John Saunders era. Originally, it was Gary Thorne, actually, that was the moderator for a little bit.
Original one, yeah.
Yeah, he was the original one before he split, and who knows what became of him. I'm just kidding. He went on to have a great career as an announcer for the Mets, the Orioles. He actually just did a few bits. And hockey, of course, too, in the 90s during the boom of hockey on ESPN. Great announcer is Gary Thorne. So after such a negative experience locally, when ESPN comes with the idea of the sports reporters, what made you say yes this time around?
Well, they're two totally different ways of being in television. Long story short, but I made a big decision in September of 1982 to leave the Boston Globe and go to work full time for the ABC affiliate in Boston, Channel 5. We can get into the reason some other time, but I did. And after a year, I said, I was good at it. I was a reporter. I wasn't never an anchor. I did packages. I went and covered stuff, and I put pieces together, and that's what I did. And they gave me a little segment show where a notebooks kind of segment, verbal notebook. I did that. And I also had a segment on a Sunday morning variety show that they had, a sports interview thing, which I interviewed some people. Well, after a year, I said, this is not what I want to do with the rest of my life. This is for somebody else. I now tried it. I've tried it with a good station. I'm working with good people. They treat me well, but this isn't what I want to do. And the ultimate reason to sum it up is this: television is a collaborative medium, and you do nothing by yourself, and you're subject to other forces. If you want to do a story, you have to get the approval of the assignment editor. You then have to have the approval of the sports director. You then you have to coordinate your time with a photographer to go meet you wherever it is to interview the subject, whether it's a coach or a player or go somewhere. And oftentimes that's not that easy. And then there's you go do the interview, you come back, you write your piece, you incorporate your sound where you want it to be. You apply, I need to get into the edit room, and you give it a time. Well, oftentimes the time comes and you can't get in because the person ahead of you is still there. It's like going to the doctor's office and they overrun the time, And so instead of having an hour and a half or two to do your piece, you're down to an hour and or less. And it's meatball surgery. It's not the way you want to do it. You're just trying to get it done. And so the piece isn't. So what it came down to, Mike, is that say I did 5 pieces a week and I was only really happy with 2. And the other 3 were frustrating. There was then the lifestyle, travel, different. You have to travel with the photographer together, nothing, I like the people, but I was used to traveling on my own, share the car, where are we going to dinner, all that stuff. Social, it was different. And then the craziest thing of all to me, I laughed. If you were going to cover a game at home, let's say the Celtics were home on Wednesday night, and I had worked during the day doing something. You actually got paid overtime to go to cover the game, and then you come in the next day, put the piece together. I said, well, this doesn't make any sense. No, I said, that wasn't going to reject the money, but this is the mindset of the TV. It was different. Everything about it was, but it's a collaborative medium, And I was, hey, and when you're a writer, you just go, you take your notebook or your tape recorder, and off you go, and you do it yourself. And you're not. So it was for somebody else, not for me. But being a talking head, where you're not in charge, you just, that's easy. And that's what I did at ESPN, and I am doing, I'm still on Around the Horn.
Yeah, you're still on Around the Horn.
So, I'm on every other week. And that's different. That's not, but working full time in local television that's very, very different. And here's the thing I say, I'm glad I had that opportunity to find out the answer. The answer was no, this is not what I want to do. But I am confident that I got the best shot at doing it at a great station with good people, and it just wasn't for me. But being a talking head, how easy is that? Very easy for me.
And that show was so ahead of its time, because think about all the shows that we have now and the format of it being a debate, First Take, there's Undisputed, all the shows pretty Around the Horn, all the shows on ESPN now, or Fox Sports 1 or any sports network you can think of. PTI, it's all derived from the sports reporters. And that show, what was so interesting and so unique about the concept of it is that it encompassed different markets. Here's Mitch from Detroit. Here's a writer from Philadelphia. Here's you in Boston, Mike Lupica being the New York guy. It really encapsulated everything about different areas of the country, but how their sports scene was at the time, that I felt that show was really so innovative for its time. And I'll ask you this, you get sadly, Dick Schaap is not around anymore. Neither is John Saunders. Both died from health issues. Dick passed away in late 2001, a few months after 9/11. He died in December. And John Saunders passed away in August of 2016. When you look back on working with both those guys, what are your favorite memories of them?
I just want to say one thing before we start. There was a precursor, and it was the sports writers on TV in Chicago.
Okay.
Got to give them credit. But they were insular. They were definitely Chicago. They were classic Chicago. I mean, that was the whole fun part of it, frankly, you know. And plus, and it was literally a smoke-filled room. Literally. You know, cigar smoking guys and smoke. Anyway, give them credit. But we kind of refined it. That's why I would say that. Dick Schaap was the best writer among broadcasters and the best broadcaster among writers. The man wrote 30-some books, and not that many of them were on sports. And was famous for writing Instant Replay with Jerry Kramer, and that was a huge, at the time, the biggest selling sports book at that history at that time, and was a Renaissance man, a New York creature of the highest degree, you know, socially. I used to love, and this will never be done either. He used to say, "I'm the only person who votes simultaneously for the Heisman and the Tonys." He was also the drama critic for Channel 4 in New York City.
Oh, really?
Yeah, see? He got New Yorkers known for that too. And special guy, one-time sports editor of Sport Magazine. I mentioned that earlier. He was the editor at one point in the 60s. Anyway, and a gentleman, a wonderful, funny guy. Oh my God, just terrific, totally missed. And John Saunders was a dream substitute, seamless transition in terms of class and competence. And what he brought was fun, always loved hockey. And he tried to inject as much hockey commentaries because, you know, he's Canadian, grew up, played hockey at Western Michigan, and transferred back to his, we eventually graduated from Ryerson College, where he's in their alma mater in Toronto. And, you know, a joy to sit next to too. And I mean, came in every Sunday morning, 6:30 with us, with a smile on his face. And even though he often was in pain, he multiple surgeries, you know, his body showed the results of all that hockey. And anyway, it was a joy to sit next to both of them, believe me. And we were so lucky to have them. And losing John was I don't know, it was a death knell, but it really hurt the show. You know, it definitely, it hurt. It totally hurt the show.
You know what? I related to John so well in that, as you just said, he was a hockey fan. And so somebody who skin complexion, John's the same as mine. Yes. John is African-American. I'm Dominican. I'm half Dominican, half Puerto Rican. And so being a Dominican, Puerto Rican, our primary sport is baseball and basketball too. But when I said I'm a big New York Rangers fan, you know, growing up, watching the Rangers, loving hockey, talking about it, people looked at me like I had two heads. Like, what are you doing liking hockey? That's not your, so much so my friends jokingly would call me an Oreo for the fact that I not only liked it, but I knew about it. I bought all the video games. I still do. And they're saying, Mike, we get the hockey video games just so we could fight, you know, that's about it. But I love the sport. And so to hear John talk about it, given his background and given the fact that somebody who you would, because unfortunately humans do this, even if we don't mean to, there's nothing malicious about it. It's just that, let's put it this way. When you visualize a hockey fan, you don't visualize somebody who looks like John or looks like me. So
that's one of the nature of the whole piece. It's like when you turn on TV now and you see Ensign Carter, you know, a lot of people, what's he doing there?
Kevin Weeks?
Yeah, right. You know, so that's, you know, you're right. But John was the voice of hockey boy. He tried so hard to, he loved hockey, tried so hard to sell it. But anyway, I think about him. Now we're coming up to the 5th anniversary. I was in Pittsburgh with my grandson, going to a couple Pirate games when I got the call. And the thing is, Mike, I'm not making this up. The last time we talked was the previous Sunday, and we were walking out of in the parking lot in Bristol, you know, on our merry way. And we were making plans about, we were going to get together in New York with our wives as soon as possible, you know, and we've been talking about this and we're definitely going to do it, you know, and then 3 days later, I get the call, John's dead. Oh my God. You know, we never really spiritually recovered. We didn't.
It's tough to lose somebody like that. It's tough. I mean, especially when it's so sudden, you know, I don't just do sports in this podcast, as my listeners know. I mix it up. I do news. I do the fire service and law enforcement, and chronicling a lot of retired members of the NYPD and FDNY who worked with guys that, you know, on the morning of the 11th, they didn't expect that to happen. All these guys were killed that they worked with. It's the shock of it, you know, when you don't see it coming is something that it takes a while to recover from for anybody.
Dick was in the hospital after having a botched hip replacement, got complications, lost consciousness. You know, we were kind of bracing ourselves for the bad news. He never came out of the hospital. Yeah, he was operated on the week just before. Oh, he did the week after 9/11. That like 3 days later, 4 days later, and he died on, I believe, December 21st, 2001. Going on about the 21st, he never came out of the hospital. It was awful. It was terrible. But you're right. John was. What are we talking about? I just saw him Sunday. He was fine. We walked out. No, yeah, that was awful. Anytime that happens to anybody, it's wrenching.
Yeah, absolutely. Transitioning into something a little bit more lighthearted.
Yeah, on a lighter note.
I want to get into covering the Red Sox because, again, this is a two-pronged question. In the 90s, some fella by the name of Pedro Martinez comes over from Montreal. And we're watching greatness now with Jacob deGrom. You know, I'm not even a Yankee fan, but I don't hate the Mets. And even I could appreciate, even if I did hate the Mets, I could appreciate what I'm seeing with Jacob deGrom. People are finding out he's appointment television to watch. And you have seen a lot of great pitchers. I mean, in the 90s, of course, Greg Maddux was around. And Greg Maddux at his peak was something to see. But this was not a hometown guy, I should say, but he was in your backyard. That's a better way to put it. Yep. Watching Pedro at his peak from 1998 through 2003, take me through what that was like, getting to see him every 5 days.
After we got a glimpse of him in 98, I said, I got to go to every game he pitches if I can. You know, if I'm home, he's pitching, I'm home. I'm there, period. I don't want to miss anything. And I felt that way. And I didn't work out that way all the time. I missed a 15 strikeout game against the Braves on a Friday night, but I saw a good requisite number of them. Although the one I didn't see in New York was funny, the 17 strikeout one hitter, on which Shirley Davis hit the foul pole, or else, you know, that was the only hit. And I arrived the next day on Saturday. That was Friday night, and talked to David Colón. And he said, it's the greatest game I've ever seen pitched, including my perfect game. And so he had 3 plus pitches at the fastball, curveball, and change. His change was outrageous. Wasn't fair, you know. He was, and he had moxie, you know. And he was bright. Oh, what a fun guy to be around. Bright guy, absolutely. Although, you know, he had his diva moments. Believe me, he had his diva moments, but still, it was a privilege. Now the thing is, it wasn't because Maddux was in the other league, but there was one great parallel rival, and how could you have a more different physical composition? Randy. Yeah. We had Randy out in the West, and we had Randy in New York. We had Randy at 6'10", you know, glowering, and we had Pedro, what is he, 5'9", 5'10", yeah. 170. Here's what Pedro has, and he'll tell you, he explain extraordinarily long fingers. He has a disproportionately sized hand, which he showed me, and not me, I'm the only person. I have seen it with my own eyes. He showed me his own grip and how, because of his fingers, the spin he could impart, the things he could do with the pitch, with the ball, that, you know, because of the ability of the hand. That was his great gift, physically. And he made full use of every mental capacity to make himself into what he was. But it was a thrilling show. It was absolutely thrilling to see them.
Just to give his numbers to the audience, 1999 to 2000 specifically. And mind you, for context, this is at a time when half the league is juiced to the gills. I mean, this is when McGuire and Sosa are at the peak of their powers, Bonds, other guys that are suspected. I don't want to name them because I'm not trying to slander them. I don't know for certain. But there are guys out there that are hitting the juice big time. This is the peak of the steroid era. And Pedro put up the following numbers in back-to-back seasons: 23 wins, 4 losses, 2.07 ERA in 99. Should have won MVP in addition to Cy Young, but they gave it to Pudge that year. Different, you know, it's a story for a different day. 2018 and 6, 1.74 ERA. The guy that finished second to him that year, which was a fellow by the name of Roger Clemens, perhaps you've heard of him, in 2000, had an ERA of 3.70, not even close. Very distant second to Pedro Martinez in 2000, though Roger wouldn't complain. He won his second World Series that year. Anyway, speaking of Roger, Yankees, Red Sox during this time. 1999, they meet in the ALCS, but everybody knows, I'm not saying this as look at me, the big Yankee fan. The Yankees stacked up better in 99 against Boston. Boston didn't quite have the pitching, but Boston loaded up. And by 2003, They got a really good team. David Ortiz is there. Manny's there. Pedro's still pitching good. He went 14-4 with 2.22 ERA that year. The bullpen's pretty good. You got guys like Todd Walker there and Trot Nixon still there. Your 2003 and 2004 were pretty interesting. And that is just a ferocious period in a ferocious rivalry. Take me through those 2 Octobers.
Well, you have to put them together. You're right. You take them all together because of what happened in 03. There were people who were maintained, including players in that team. One I know, Millar, believes this, Kevin Millar. The 03 is actually a little bit more potent, top to bottom. That's how good the 03 lineup was. So they get into the playoffs, and we all know we have the up and down series, and we get to Game 7, and they're winning. Millar hits a home run. And we get to the 8th inning, and Pedro comes back out, which shocked everybody. We thought he thought he was out of the game. He walked off, pointed to the sky, after the 7th inning, and that was the way he had been used all year. At that point in his career, we weren't going around for that. Then Grady brought him back, and we all know what happened. The Yankees came back and won the game, and Grady wound up getting fired, and I'll never forget that post-game press conference when he said, well, that's the way we went all year. No, that's not the way you went all year. That's not the way you went all year. And anyway, so that's the setup that they thought they were the better team in 03. And it very well may have been. Now we get to 04, and let's pick it up with Game 3. 19-8, Saturday night, 19-8. But little hidden thing in there, and that was that Tim Wakefield took one for the team, gave him like 5 innings. And saved the bullpen, and that was a little hint. We get to Game 6, we get to the 9th inning, and we all know Rivera walks Millar, and here comes Dave Roberts, who had been picked up quietly on trading deadline. People weren't paying any attention to it at all, and everyone in the ballpark knows he's there. He's got to do one thing: steal the base, steal second base. Which after drawing 3 throws over from he had been a pinch runner earlier in the year against Rivera, and he studied him and found out that he said his big mechanism is holding the ball. His defense mechanism is making you, antsy, holding the ball. And he knew that after the 3rd throw, he was going to go to the plate, and he did. And Posada uncorks a really good throw, and it was and Jeter was the master of the swipe tag, and it wouldn't have stunned anybody if Joe West missed the call because Jeter was so good at that. But you can see he was safe. All replays will show he was safe. Not by much, but he was safe. And then Bill Miller hits one up the middle, and you watch it. Rivera tried to kick it, and he just missed kicking it, but it went into center field. And they eventually went on the 14th on a home run by Poppy. So now we're in Game 4, and now Millar's going on. Don't let us win. The Game 5, I mean, don't let us win. Well, Game 5 starts the same day because Game 4 ended after midnight. So Game 5 starts the same day, 5:00 p.m. And it's an epic game, and they wound up winning it on a bat by Poppy after Edwin on Loaiza, a 10-pitch at bat. He bloops one in the center to bring home the winning run. But the key in that one was Wakefield had come in, and his normal catcher was Doug Mirabelli. But he was out of the game, and Baratek's catching him, and he doesn't catch him as a rule for a reason. he passed balls around the 3rd base, and this is the tying run. Whoever it was, I forget. Well, but Wakefield strikes out Ruben Sierra to get out of that inning, and they win it. So now we go to New York, and that's the bloody sock game.
Yep.
Game 6. Nomar has a big game. I'm not sorry, he's not. Yeah, he's not there. He's gone. We talked about it the year before. And then we get to Game 7, and the Yankees are out of pitchers. They got to use a battered Kevin Brown. They don't have any real viable pitching option. And Johnny Damon hits a grand slam in the 2nd inning, put him away, and they win the game. And it comes out. The point is, this breaks the curse, 86 years. And I'm not going to say that fans felt it was worth waiting 86 years, but if you're going to do it, what more possibly sweeter, more satisfying, soul-satisfying way for a Red Sox fan than to become from 03 against the Yankees, it was, and it was fun. It was great stuff. The rivalry was absolutely its peak. They had a thing in the middle of the season, the game when Baratek shoved his glove into A-Rod's face.
Yep.
Oh yeah, it was all kinds of stuff going on. There was real feeling there, and of course you had the inherent rivalry of Jeter and the fans, and oh yeah, it was great stuff, but that was the beginning of Poppy as a force. Those 2 years.
And I could look at it objectively because when this is going down, I'm like 3 or 4 years old. And so it doesn't, 2004, if somebody brings that up to me, that doesn't bother me as a Yankee fan as much as it would somebody who is a little older and remembers it. Because, for example, some Yankee fans to this day still have a hesitancy in embracing Johnny Damon. But for me, I love Johnny Damon because when I think of Johnny Damon, he's the guy that stole 2 bases in the 2009 World Series and helped the Yankees win that World Series. So to me, when I think of Johnny, he's a Yankee. And he's a guy that played a big role on that 2009 squad. And what a career, by the way, as an aside. He helped the Red Sox and the Yankees win World Series.
His numbers are Hall of Fame worthy numbers.
Yeah, the 2,700 plus hits.
His career with the Royals. Absolutely. No, I'm glad you feel that way because he should be remembered finally, I think, by the Yankee fans.
Yeah, most Yankee fans do remember him fondly. I know I do. He's one of my favorites, and the Yankees could use him now. I mean, the Yankees don't have any lefties. He was a great lefty bat. So as a quick aside before I move out of 03-04, what really is unnoticed and people don't talk about it, people kind of overlook it, is the pivot in who had the better pitching. Because 2003, what made the Yankees great from 96 through 03 is, besides timely hitting and great talent, is the pitching. Because let's just focus on their 2003 rotation. Roger Clemens, who won 17 games that year, Andy Pettitte, who won 21 games that year, Mike Messina, David Wells, and they could throw a fifth starter in there, Jose Contreras, but fine, whatever. You have 4 bona fide starters, highly effective. 2004, Messina, okay. El Duque, who pitched pretty well for the Yankees that year. What's after that? Kevin Brown, who, as Joe Torre wrote about in his book, was a mental case, unfortunately. It's actually really sad how Kevin was at the end of his career. Hope he's doing better wherever he is. Esteban Loaiza, not particularly effective, and I don't even remember who their fifth starter was. By the time they got to Game 7, looking at Kevin Brown in the bullpen, Joe Torre put this in his book, Mike Messina said, "We have no shot." Yeah. And sure enough, Poppy hits a 2-run home run in the first, and they have no shot.
He was the unsung hero in 03 in Game 7. He came on and pitched a shutout ball in a relief role he had never done before.
Absolutely.
I was never hit. And he saved their life and kept them afloat in Game 7. Mike Messina, I did vote for. I think was and talk about a free agent signing that maybe the best one the Yankees ever made in terms of production and value, right?
Absolutely. And I wish he would have held on and stayed for 09. I would have loved to have seen Moose get a ring with the Yankees because he came right after they beat the Mets in 2000. So he missed that ring. They lose in 01. They lose in 03, obviously 04. And right when he leaves, that's when they finally break through in the World Series.
After winning 3, which no one ever did.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen him get one with the Yankees. So I'll move into, because I don't want to keep it too long. It's been so cool talking with you. The Sports Reporters ended as a television show in 2017, but it's reemerged as a podcast, which I listen to every Monday and Thursday. Always love listening to you guys. And so tell me, by this point, you had left the Globe in 2012. You made the decision to step away on a full-time basis. You're still a columnist emeritus for the Globe. You're still doing ESPN, but now you're into the world of podcasting. So it took you a couple of episodes. You weren't on the original episodes. You came back around episode 3, episode 4. When Mike and Mitch float the idea of, hey, let's continue this in the podcast realm, what were you thinking about it? And what led you to ultimately say, you know what, I think I will be a part of this?
The delay was technical for the most part. It was about, they needed certain equipment. I didn't have it yet. And, I was interested from the time they first broached the idea. Mitch called me and said, here's what I want to do. Oh yeah, let's go. But that was I was in their thoughts in the beginning, but I didn't get on board right away. We were enjoying it. What can I say? All right, let me back up. I was introduced personally in the world of podcasts in 2017 by a guy named Bob Snyder in Boston, who with Hometown Podcast. It was my own podcast, and we broadcast from a local restaurant. And I had, a lot of interviews. I mean, I did, just perfunctory Boston interviews, and we did a lot of just plain radio interviews. I interviewed Larry Bird, David Stern, etc. And anyway, eventually it just ran its course. Frankly, they ran out of sponsors, and I did it for a year and a half, I guess. I was then sitting around minding my own business when this Sports Reporters one came up, and so that's every Monday and Thursday, as you say. We're enjoying it. I'm always trying to push them a little more, but I never win. That I think we shy away from the fact that we're the old guys with some perspective and historical knowledge more than I like to. I like to lean on that. I think we have things we can do that not available to, aren't in the province of a lot of the people, but, but we keep on top of it. And we're topical, let's face it. Well, obviously we need to be topical, but I wish we get a little more philosophical more often, but that's just me. I'm outvoted 2-1, so that's okay. We're still all friends. And it's great to be able to resurrect the idea of it, so I'm proud of it. I think we deliver the goods, and I just think our perspective does show up. Because let's be honest, we're not shying away here. We've got literally, about 150 years worth of cumulative professional experience, and we've all seen a lot, and not just. Including now that the Olympics are here, we're all Olympic veterans, and I got some strong feelings about what's going on. And in fact, I'm going to be writing about it. You mentioned I do write. I'm going back writing every other week, roughly, for the Globe. I dubbed myself the columnist emeritus, and so I'm going to be back writing. And again, I was sidelined through COVID. It was budget. I said, hey. We're all messed up. We can't pay you. And I said, I totally understand. But I'm back now.
That's good. And that's good. And I enjoy it. And listen, like I said, I'm a little different because I'm a history buff, but even me as a young 21-year-old guy, I don't look at it and say, they're tired of telling me stories from the 90s or the 80s. No, I want to hear this stuff. Because again, as we talked about earlier, look at the Lakers and the Celtics, look at what we were just talking about just now with the Yankees and the Red Sox. You get such an interesting look at what it is that comprises different points in sports history. So it's a very interesting thing. And, I love hearing those stories, and I never mind when you guys go down those rabbit holes when you choose to. So, Bob, I've kept you long enough. I'm going to get to the concluding segment now of this podcast, and there's rapid fire. It's been so fun talking with you. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 answers from you. And let me see, are you ready?
Go ahead.
So first, if not for sports writing, what other career could you have seen yourself pursuing?
Music, disc jockey. I'm a student of, I'm a child of the 50s, which means that in addition to growing up with the old standards in the Great American Songbook, I was at the birth of rock and roll and immersed it completely. And once again, living in Trenton, New Jersey, I got Philadelphia and New York. I grew up with WIBG in Philadelphia, WABC in New York, and I love music. And so that there's no question that's what I would like to do. I'd still like to do it.
First, second, funniest athlete you ever covered?
Funniest? Billy.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it has to be. Off the top of my head, I have to say Bill Lee.
Unfortunately, yeah, he was never the same after that brawl against the Yankees in '76.
No,
he hurt his arm.
He was never the same.
Yeah.
No, it's too bad. He won 17 3 games in a row. He was a quality pitcher until that. It's true.
All right. So third, athlete you wish you could have covered.
Joe Dimaggio. I've said that a million times. The reason being, all the great players, I love baseball, all the great players of the past, going back to the 19th century, going through Hannes Wagner and Cobb and Ruth and all. But the elders speak of Dimaggio in a different way when I grew up. The grace, the beauty, the effortlessness, if you will, the classy way he played, everything, running the bases, everything about him, the way he went up there after the ball. I would like to have seen the vintage Joe Dimaggio.
I always harken back to that line by Paul Simon. Where have you gone, Joe Dimaggio, in the iconic song, Mrs. Robinson. Fourth, story you're proudest of having written, or, you can say multiple, you don't have to pick just one.
Oh boy, that's a good one. A story I'm proudest of having written. I don't know. It's hard to answer. Maybe some stuff in the Olympics. It's hard to say. I really love the Olympics, and that's why I'm pained about what's happened to them and what's going on now and all that. Because I had some really surprisingly wonderful things. Hell, I'm trying to think. I'm afraid I don't have an answer. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I know it's a tough question. You can say pass if you want. I always
5 minutes after we were done. You know that.
I always forget to say you could say pass at the beginning of the rapid fire.
All right.
It's a
Yeah,
personal
really.
failing of mine. Fifth, if I could speak English, that would be wonderful. Fifth and finally, knowing what you know now and having had the experience that you've had, if you can go back in time and give advice to a young Bob Ryan, what would you tell a young Bob Ryan?
Maybe I was a little too emotionally involved with the '70s Celtics. Maybe I could have handled that a little bit better, I think. I remember promising myself when the next stint, because I did it 3 different times. I did it from 69 to 76. I did it from 78 to 82. And I did it from middle of 85, 86 to the end of 87, 88. 13 and a half years, 3 different times. I remember thinking the second time around, try not to get as emotionally involved, as I did. But that was hard for me, because it was so easy to do it. Those guys were so good to me, I mean, I really consider John Havlicek a friend, and Westfall was a very good friend, and one of my all-time favorite people, Paul Silas. Oh God, we could go on and on about him. So, but it probably I should have toned it down a little.
And so that concludes what's been a great episode of the Mike Game podcast. We got back into the sports aspect of it. And that's the thing. You never know who you're going to talk to week on this show. And I really get the chance to have some great conversations. It's so cool to get to have you here, Bob. I'm really glad that you made the time for me. And I had Bob on. Hopefully soon I can get Mike and Mitch on. I'm going to complete the trifecta. If it's the last thing I do, I have to get Lupica and Alvin on. I know they're busy, but hopefully they can come on at different times. So before we go, let's promote ourselves. I know you are on social media. So if the people don't know where to find Bob Ryan, where can they find Bob Ryan?
Well, I need to get myself reestablished. I'm in a bit of a hiatus, but as soon as I can, possibly, it'll be at Globe Bob Ryan. That's my Twitter. And I got sidetracked. I got sidelined with a lost phone, but I got to get my Twitter account back because I haven't been heard from for about 5 weeks. But I will be. I promise. Give me a week or at the most, and I'll be back.
So this is Bob's proof. He's okay, folks. He's fine. You don't need to send out an SOS form.
Yeah, he's fine. He's just lazy. That's all.
He's all good. Of course, you can find Bob on the Sports Reporters podcast too. It's wherever you get your podcast. I'll link it in the description of this episode below. You can find it every Monday and Thursday. Again, wherever you get your podcast. On my end, by now, you should know where to find me. But if you don't, if you're listening for the first time, Twitter at Mike in New Haven, which is my old WFAN calling name by now, as you know. Instagram, original_MC1. I'm not on Facebook. I avoid Facebook like the plague. But I am on LinkedIn, Mike Colón. Just type in Mike Colón and then follow that with MIC_D for the Mike New Haven podcast, where you can connect with me. If you have any sports-related inquiries regarding the podcast, the business line for that, 917-727-0891, or the email is colononsports, COLON on sports @gmail.com. Or if you want to reach me for any other podcast-related inquiries, you could reach me at 917-781-6189 or email me at the Colón Report, THECOLON report @gmail.com. So coming up on the Mike Navy podcast next week, we go back to the law enforcement aspect of this show. Tales from the Boom Room, Volume 10, Profiles of the NYPD's Arson, Explosion, and Bomb Squad, continues with retired NYPD Bomb Squad Detective James Carano. Looking forward to talking with him. And Tuesday, retired NYPD Emergency Service Unit Sergeant John Lampkin. John did everything in the ESU, talking down suicidal people, going on raids. You do it all when you're in a unit like that. He'll be joining the show next Tuesday, and more exciting guests in the works that I'm working to confirm from all different fields, all different types here in the Mike Navy podcast. All that being considered and said, on behalf of Bob Ryan, I am Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.